Ooh, the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, here for another weekly Q&A, baby. And wow, did I get a lot of messages about the last one. And a lot of it was, and on myriad platforms, Instagram, all over the place, just saying, thank you so much for bringing these back. Also had requests to bring back the live Q&As, which, yes, I have every intention of doing that again. Now that I have Starlink correctly set up, and believe me, I don't want to use Starlink, but it's what was available to allow for, a really efficacious use or transmission, I guess I should say. It's what made sense at the time. If I can change that in the future, I certainly will. But Starlink 100% is a serious central point of failure, in an already problematic centralized internet. Anyway, so now that I have that, though, I can do these things. And that's not to say Starlink is entirely perfect. Speeds are pretty good. Again, minus the fact it's not fiber, but they're pretty good for what it is. And, like you've heard a lot of the live shows recently, or should I say the live recordings that I've done with Rob and Freebeard, which those have been a ton of fun. Great response to those. Thank you. I know Rob's had a great time doing them as well. But now like I'm actually able to do these kind of, remote guest recordings, as to where that really wasn't possible before. So now also, yes, I feel pretty confident in doing, live Q&As. And as far as what platform and all of that I'm going to end up using, that's a little bit in the air, but it's something that, again, that I can do now. I want to get some initial shop talk done here quickly in the beginning of this. And then we've got, there's no way I'm going to get to all these questions, even just the new ones. But I've got a lot of great questions here. Some that are a sequel I'll probably do the ones that are a sequel to last week's, Q&A, but, just to open this up. So I want to explain like a few things that can come off as confusing. Okay. And believe me, they're just as confusing for me. And the reality is, I am I have Ellen, I have Rob, I have people who are like willing to help and do help, where possible. But in a very real sense, like this is a one-person show. And every time, honestly, that I've tried to take it to other places, and like work with other teams or whatever, like it always just kind of falls apart, partly because, like I'm very difficult, as a podcaster and really as a person, but I'm very difficult to like, pigeonhole. Like I'm very difficult to like, okay, how do you classify this? Right. And you never know what the hell I'm going to say. And it's, the reality is that sovereign tech, okay, is like chaos incarnate, right? As far as what can be talked about, like, talking about tech, and we're going to do that in this episode. Don't worry. Okay. Talking about tech was, really like it was a point of focus. But really everything could wellspring from that. Now, when I started talking about tech, starting in 2012, when I started talking about that, tech wasn't a part of every part of our lives, right? Like you could still, and really you could in 2012, you could get away with not having a computer or not having a smartphone. Okay. Can you still do that today? Yes, of course. But, are you going to be able to order something at a restaurant? Are you going to be able to, connect with your bank? Are you going to be able to do blah, 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 all this stuff? Yeah, maybe not. Okay. We're going to get into some of this actually in a couple of the questions, but this is the thing is that, the first point I want to make is, I've never played well with others, but like, even in attempts to try and like, I wouldn't want to say next level this podcast because this podcast has been popular enough. Okay. But when, I try to maybe make it a little more professional, I don't even know what term to use for this. Give it a little more of a sheen, or, more of a populist sheen. How about that? It never works out, because that just, it's antithetical. It's the very antithesis of me, of my existence, of everything I know and everything I am. So it just doesn't work that way. And I think that it's also true for a lot of the listeners. Now, something that I am discovering quickly, with the big push that has been made through 2020, through 2024 and into 2025, more of the push of being on YouTube. Okay. That has yielded some odd results, because I've gotten another strike. I can still post on YouTube, but I've gotten another strike. And this time it wasn't due to, like last time it was, and I couldn't post for, I forget how many weeks, but anyway, last time it had to do with an episode from over 10 years ago where I was on another person's podcast. And there was like medical info that wasn't even me saying it, that YouTube had a problem with, and I got my ding, right? I got my strike. Now I've got a second one, and this one had to do with my own content, but it had to do with espousing like sexuality in an erotic fashion. I'm like, well, no fucking shit. I think that's my whole mission in life. I'm a Jew, for crying out loud. What do you? We invented porn. Excuse me. That was a bad one. Anyway, so boy, YouTube did not like that. And so I had to go through this stupid little course thing to, do you know what's allowed as far as sex on YouTube and blah, blah. And like, look, I'll keep publishing on YouTube, but it is at this point, I think it's 100% guarantee that I'm going to get taken off of YouTube, because I'm not going to shut up. I'm not going to censor myself. What's the point to doing this if I'm just going to fucking censor myself and sound like the rest of the goddamn idiots on that platform? And most of them are. Not counting like Esoterica. I mean, Dr. Sledge is the man, right? And some others. There's good people out there. Don't confuse me, but most of it is fucking shit. Hell, I can't even say fucking inside of the first 30 seconds of a video, or it gets taken down, or it gets dinged or whatever, and like doesn't show up in the algorithm. Holy hell. Now, to think that, is this just YouTube? Is YouTube the problem? No, not actually. I'll give you a little bit more. And again, I'll try not to spend too much more time on this, but I just want you to know what's up. Spotify is taking down a little over 150 of my episodes. And understand, I've done well over 1,000, over 1,500 episodes, actually, I believe, all told. Actually, I'm looking at it. No, it's almost 2,000. I've done almost 2,000 episodes. And that's to say, how many hours is that? Thousands upon thousands. But I've done, nearly 2,000 episodes over the past, over a decade. And so is 150 that many? No, I suppose not. But the funny thing is, I've been, like Anchor had me come on. When I started it, I asked outright, hey, I use copyrighted music in some of my stuff. I've used that over the years, and I've been doing this for a decade. Like, what do you got? Over a decade. And what was this, back 2019, I think, when this all happened? And I'm not even sure that Spotify owned Anchor yet at that time. Anyway, or no, they did, because what Anchor responded to me with was, don't worry, we're now owned by Spotify. I didn't know that they were necessarily, but don't worry, we're owned by Spotify. We have licenses for fucking everything. So I didn't worry about it. And for the past 5 years or so, like, I've been on Spotify for podcasters, or what was previously Anchor. And there might've been a couple situations where like a TIE Fighter Renegades got taken down because of usage of something from Andor or whatever, which, yep, am excited for season 2, even though I don't like Disney Star Wars. But it's never been a problem. But then last week, suddenly, boom, hey, we have copyright issues with all this stuff, because I guess Spotify just doesn't have the fucking licenses for this shit anymore. And so I have a little over 150 episodes getting taken down. Now, sometimes the music I use is really deep cut stuff. like really deep cut. We're not talking about like, yeah, okay, there's episodes where I've used Ozzy's music or, you know, Ozzy Osbourne, or because there's probably another Ozzy now, you know, crazy. Anyway, but that's how it goes, right? So, you know, but so like I use deep cut stuff from like soundtracks, you know, like movie or TV soundtracks that like nobody but me knows or remembers. Nobody. Like you couldn't even, and particularly even if you knew the TV show or the movie, I guarantee you don't know the person who composed that. I do. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that like I'm referencing the scarce nature of this information. But out of nowhere, in the past week, like, I mean, and they knew the name of the composer. I mean, they list, and it's not even stuff listed on Spotify, which is also incredibly or kind of weird. I mean, some of it is, but some of it isn't. The point I'm getting at is that this is, you know, in my opinion, this is where AI has really upped the game, especially in copyright enforcement, which is hilarious because AI is nothing without getting trained on copyrighted content that the copyright holders don't want AI to have, right? It's a very vicious circle we're living in right now in the tech world, okay? Now me, I mean, I don't believe in IP, so I don't care. You know, like intellectual property is nonsense. It's the height of hubris. So AI can take all it wants, you know, from me, from anything, whatever. I don't give a shit. Actually, there's a caveat to that that has to do with mysticism. I might get to that question this week. We will see. But anyway, so now, you know, AI can enforce this, you know, DMCA shit, you know, really efficaciously because it doesn't need humans to be looking for it anymore. And now there's probably, and I don't know this, but I'm sure that there's some kind of database that like you can upload your music to and say, find everybody that's using this, you know, and I've also noticed this in my, you know, in my quote unquote day work with other podcasts where music has been used, bought on Pond 5, in fact, and now it's getting dinged by YouTube as copyrighted material, even though it was bought and paid for on Pond 5, you know, and there's a full license to use it and everything. But, you know, this just in the past couple weeks, I mean, all of these events have occurred in the past couple weeks. This is what, you know, this is the nature of this. I mean, is AI useful for this in the sadistic sense? Yeah, sure it is. Why? Because it's all digital, it's all machine. So can the machine talk better to the machine and act faster and more efficiently within the machine than the human? Of course. Just speaking abstractly. So this doesn't surprise me, but this is the world we live in. And if you're a podcaster, I highly, highly, highly recommend. And I know a lot of people listening don't care, and Satan bless you, and I mean that. Okay. But I highly recommend that you do not use copyrighted music. If anything, don't even use music at all. Because I feel like, I mean, and because the disputation process you have to go through, even with YouTube, is a fucking mess. Because the thing is, like, does your music sound like somebody else's music? You know, where does that line get drawn a lot? And as we create more music going into the future, you know, again, I think there is a, ultimately in the, in the short form music, what's the word I'm looking for? Not ethos. That's not the word I'm looking for. But, you know, I mean, okay, understand this. Like, and I don't think most people realize this. Like, why does a song have to be, you know, anywhere between 2.5 to 5 minutes? I mean, yes, not counting Dream Theater where a song can be 28 minutes. Okay, fine. Which, hey, great boys. And I mean it. Last album, fucking dynamite. You know, why? I mean, that's just a modern construct. You know, there's no rules to say how long songs need to be. And yes, I know songs do have varying things, but like what gets put on the radio, what is popular, what's topping the charts on Spotify and all this stuff. Generally, it's not a 10-minute song, right? Or an hour-long song or something like that. There is this very specific range that has to do with attention span, which is probably getting worse all the time. Okay. But these are constructs. Now, in the idea that there is a certain amount of attention span within 3 minutes and the finitude of instruments that exist, yes, you can make new ones, but it's very rare that gets done anymore. Okay. But the finitude of instruments, the amount of notes within the scales that human hearing has. If you don't get the equation that I'm putting together here, there is a limit to the amount of new music that can get made. Okay. Now the music industry knows this. It's why they do sampling. It's why they do all this other shit, right? It's why they buy up entire, catalogs from old bands and everything, because they know, like, oh, we're running out. Like we hit peak music decades ago. Okay. For many reasons, but for sure, understand that this is a reality. All you have to do is the math. It's not science. It's not research. It's not any of that crap. It's not debatable. It's math. There is a limit. I'm not saying that we've actually really hit it. We haven't really hit peak music. It feels like it because everything's shit today, or most things are shit today, unless it comes out of Eastern Europe. But really, but Norway, whatever. Anyway, okay. Anyway, there is a limit to how much you can do. And, if we're just constantly in this like IP war, which seems to be the primary focus, on streaming platforms, whether video, audio, whatever. Okay. This is just going to get worse until you get to the point that like the only person that can seem to make anything, and make money off of it, are the rights holders. Okay. Who have, anyway, this is a completely separate subject that I plan on getting into, but the point I'm making is I would recommend, don't use music. Okay. Just don't. And like the license can change hands unless maybe you use music from the public domain, that is safely in the public domain, regardless of, territory, regardless of geography. Maybe you could do that. Anyway, this just proves the point that like intellectual property, that very concept doesn't protect creativity. It actually stifles it. And it's a concept that needs to die. Copyright has to go away completely. Copyright, trademark, registry, all of it, like go away. Patents, fuck them. But it's not going to happen because there's so many, and you don't even realize it. Like there's so many people who may not even be directly like the creator of said IP, who just, they live off of IP entirely. They live off of a patent or they live off of whatever. And it's so bad. Anyway, okay, I got to wrap this up because almost 20 minutes in and I'm just talking about this shit. The point that I want to get to is, yes, I have set up an account on Rumble where I will be posting videos on Rumble as an alternative to YouTube. We'll see how that goes. Okay. The other is clearly like I am not going to allow 150 of my episodes to not exist. Okay. On the, or not be available, I should say, to the general public. So, now I've said this before when I transferred from Podbean to Anchor/Spotify, I said, if this doesn't work out with Spotify, then I'm going to go to self-hosting. I'm not going to jump services again. Like I'm not going to go to, you take your pick, whatever the fuck it is, Libsyn, I don't care. I'm not going to it. So, I will be creating like this feed that you're using right now will continue to get, new episodes and all of this. And you really shouldn't run into a problem with getting those. Shouldn't, I should say. But if you want to be on the safe side, I am creating a new master feed that will have everything. And I am going to self-host it off of my own hardware. Not going to say from where it's located or anything along those lines. Okay. I'm going to do this right. And I know how to do it. You know who you're talking to or who you're listening to. But yeah, so I will be making a censorship-free, censorship-resistant master podcast feed. It'll be audio only. That will be out there, always available. And once that's done, it's a process that's going to take a little bit of time. But once it's done, I will certainly link to it in the show notes. I will talk about it and I'll have the conversation again. I might do like a little separate mini episode talking about why this is needed, why you may want it, and all of that. And so that, again, it's going to have everything in it. It's going to be so complete. I'm really, really very excited about that. Also, the same process. We're going to be doing transcripts for every episode, and that's going to have some interesting, kind of byproducts that are going to come out of that as well. So this is going to be a ton of work, but it needs to be, because again, like, I'm getting censored right and left, and I'm not like whining about it. I know this is the nature of the beast. Okay. I'm not here. Free speech, free speech. It's not even about, it's fucking IP. Or ultimately, I mean, yeah, the sex thing on YouTube is fucking stupid, especially when you see what is allowed on YouTube as far as violence and all that. I mean, it's the classic, movie argument. It's like, oh yeah, a movie, you can have millions of people getting their limbs blown off, but boy, you show somebody's, cock or pussy and get that off. That's not allowed in theaters. I mean, insane, right? Or, put a stronger rating on that. Okay. Anyway, so that's where we're at. The last thing I want to mention is, I don't even know if I want to go into this now, because it might not end up being a problem in the near future, but very quickly. So you'll notice if you go to YouTube, there are actually 2 versions of pretty much each episode that goes up. And the reason for this is to allow for, because I make sure that, my shows are available on every single fucking platform on the planet. Okay. Even weird things like Fountain, where you get Bitcoin for listening. I don't know. I've never gotten any, but I mean, there's an address in the show notes if you want to send me some, but maybe email me and let me know. I'd really, if you're going to honor me that way, I'd like to honor you in return. Anyway, so, in so doing, like, it's so weird. You have to like put in your feed, your audio podcast feed, and then it can get taken in by YouTube. But then what it does is it basically sucks in every episode. YouTube automatically sucks in every episode from your audio podcast feed, which in this case is from Spotify, is hosted by Spotify. Okay. And it puts out an episode. Now it puts that in your channel. And that's what makes it available on YouTube Music, for people to listen to podcasts there, or to, now there's like a podcast tab on the primary YouTube apps, including on, like TV apps. Okay. And it's so convoluted, and you can look it up. It's not like I haven't looked into it or something. Okay. You can look up about this. Nobody really knows how or why YouTube classifies an episode as a podcast or not. Like, it's incredibly convoluted. But the obviously the audio podcasts that it draws, those are they're it's just a static image on them. Okay. As to where, yes, I have episodes that are full video that I do. Not all, but most are full video. And those are like, okay, I need to put those up on YouTube so people can get the video. Now on Spotify, you can get the video and the audio, and you can just flip between which one you want. But on YouTube, you basically have to do 2 listings, 2 posts. And so that's why every episode kind of doubles up. I think this is really, really ugly from a UI perspective. I think it's completely wonky from a UX perspective, especially for the podcaster. It's a mess. YouTube is a complete mess. Bottom line. Okay. Again, there's great people putting out great content on YouTube. I love that YouTube has basically democratized, albeit heavily censored, has democratized the ability to make high quality educational content, among other things. Okay. Like, and fictional content as well. Like that's so great. Okay. So don't confuse what I'm saying. I'm just saying, for a podcaster, YouTube is a goddamn mess. And the only reason that the podcast industry is pushing for people to use video is to funnel them into controlled platforms. What I mean by that is the 2 primary platforms that do video and audio are YouTube and Spotify. Okay. The video is the hard part. Lots of people that do audio, not many that do video. Okay. So if you get forced into video, you have effectively become controlled. Because you can't host you can't host your own 1080p video, not for 10 years. Are you kidding? Anyway, so there's that part of it, but then also advertisers like Spotify and YouTube, because they get guaranteed metrics. that they can verify. Okay. And that's a challenge with podcasting, is to be able to like, and even it's not even about being like dishonest or, like having some kind of malicious, motive or something. Because, like if you wanted to know as a podcaster, well, how many people listen to my show? You have almost no way of truly knowing that answer. Now you do on Spotify and YouTube, but outside of that, it's Wild West. You have no idea. So advertisers don't like that. And to some degree, I can understand why. To some degree, I have my own issues with that whole, way of thinking. But regardless, that's the big push for video, is to really, is to take control over the medium by controlling where the advertising dollars can go. Like I genuinely think that this is, if there is something malicious, this is malicious. Funneling everybody into YouTube and Spotify is absolutely malicious. It is meant to keep things from being democratized, or at least democratized to where you can make money off of, having a democratized platform. It's so bad. It's so bad. And again, even if you just talk about sex in a way that YouTube doesn't like, because there's ways apparently they do like it, but if it's not quote unquote educational or, art or something like that, you're screwed. You're screwed. So, okay. I ended up talking about that for a fucking half hour. That means I'm going to have to go a whole other hour. I hope you found some of that information interesting. I think it speaks to a lot of aspects of our times, well beyond what's going on with my own podcast. Okay. But now I need to get into some questions. So it looks like I'm going to have to go another hour. I know. Is everybody complaining? You tell me. Boy, you just talked too fucking long. Get it in the comments on YouTube while it's still there. Get the comments on Spotify, or you can be particularly saucy and use the platform that more or less can't be shut down and shoot me an email. fu@xxtech.net, folks. Also, just quick on that. Speaking of xxtech.net or xxtech, OnlyFans. I have not been posting every episode on OnlyFans, but I may start doing so because we do have, the Miri Gold Blossom account, miri.xxtech.net, where we're doing lots of fun stuff with the Sovereign Universe, or at least, we're building that up more. Did a really, really, oh man, what a hot fucking video that was. First one. And I can't stop watching it. It was, that was so sultry and just smoking. Anyway, yeah, Miri.xxtech, it's MIRI, as in Miriam Gold Blossom, MIRI, Miri.xxtech.net, or you can go to onlyfans.com/sovereign. That, and you can get your hookup there. But that's a somewhat censorship resistant, okay, like certainly a lot looser rules than Spotify or YouTube, that I need to take advantage of more. Okay. Because I can put free content up there too. You still have to subscribe, but like I can put free content on that. So that's something I'll be doing more of, as well, just to let you folks know how these things are going. And if I suddenly disappear off of YouTube, you know why. And, I will have, again, that master podcast, that really like ultra master podcast feed. I will definitely let everybody know when that's available. And, again, it will be completely decentralized. So rock and roll. Okay. Get rid of the censorship. Let's see if I can get in trouble for this one. All right, let's start off with we're already talking tech. Let's start talking about the tech stuff. And then we're going to talk about the Nephilim, to wrap it up. So here we go. Let's see. Hi, Brian. Well, I'm not used to being called by my first name. not an email anyway. Okay. Hi, Brian. Thank you so much for bringing back the Q&A. I've missed it so. I loved your conversation on smartwatches and how they're just not quote unquote there yet. But that leads me to ask the question, are smartphones there yet? What I mean by that is, can the smartphone really finally replace the PC? I have a Galaxy S24 and I don't feel like DeX is totally there yet for a desktop, but it feels awfully close. What are your thoughts? Oh, great one. Brian was better. I don't know about this. Oh, great one. Anyway, okay. Yeah. So this is a good question to ask. I planned on talking about a completely different subject at the start of this, and I'm going to get into that now just because that I think will color the next two, this question and the following question that I want to get to, because I don't think it'll be a long one. And this won't really have anything to do with the Nephilim, but we'll get to those. Okay. Everything, I said this 5 years ago, but it's still true now, and it's more true now. Okay. In fact, it's more true. I'm going to say it even slightly differently to where, it's more true. Okay. Everything you think you know about tech is no longer valid. Okay. Like everything you think you know about Microsoft, everything you think you know about Apple, everything you think you know about Google, everything you think you know, take your pick, Samsung, whoever. Everything you think you know is, and you've thought you've known, and everything you've, gotten used to. This might be the most important part. Everything you've gotten used to over the past 40 years or 50 years from these companies, right? Apple just celebrated their 49th year in operation. Microsoft is celebrating their 50th, which is amazing to think that company's been around 50 years. Everything you think you know over that time, it's gone. It's dead. It's buried. It's no longer true. I mean, yes, the history is still true, but it has zero bearing. None. It has no bearing on what these companies do today, on what they do tomorrow, on what they did, honestly, yesterday. It has no bearing at all. All of these tech shows that have built up, okay, and when I mean like tech podcasts or whatever, all these tech podcasts, all these journalists who have built their careers and their livelihoods around the tech industry and specific ways in which they think about how tech should work and how they think how computers should be defined and work and how they think that software is done and how they think this and that. It doesn't matter. It's been completely erased. And it's not even AI that did it, but it's been completely erased. What's actually done it is the addiction to real-time feedback. Okay. We are at a time where you can, and I mean, in this, what really colored this for me, what brought this point home is Nintendo's Direct that Rob and I talked about. Really the past two Directs that he and I had talked about. Because this, I felt, the more I think about it and the more information that comes out, especially around the Switch 2, okay? Look, if you're not a gamer, trust me, this is still important to you, okay? The information around the Switch 2, in the way that it's been leaking, I mean, a lot of the questions that Rob and I asked in yesterday's episode, or that got released yesterday, this is April 4th, 2025, have been answered. Are the Joy-Con 1s going to work with the Switch 2? We now know the answer. Yes, they will. Even though they don't have the C button on them, there's a way to do it from the home button. It won't work across the board. There are some things that need the C button function, but or that need the functionality like the mouse controls of the Switch of the Joy-Con 2. But ultimately, the Joy-Con 1, the N64 controllers, the NES controllers, SNES controllers, the Switch Pro controller, all of those will connect to the Switch 2. I mean, you can't charge the NES controllers anymore on it, but whatever. Okay, so you get my point. Just the way that the flux, the flow of information has been happening from the Nintendo Direct, it's a completely different world now from how consoles used to get announced. It's a completely different world from how games used to be announced, how things used to get launched. It's a completely different world. And so, it really highlighted for me, again, the more I've thought about it, it really highlights for me how the way you expect things to be or to be done, the way you expect things to be built, designed, all this shit, that's all just thrown out the window. All the people complaining about, Windows 11 should do this and should be this way and should be, and hey, I've been there. I've made those complaints as well. Okay. But there's also a reason that I have a Fedora machine next to me. So anyway, but all of those arguments, all that crap, they are all completely meaningless and invalid. Did I hurt your feelings? Too bad. They're meaningless and invalid because Microsoft, like what they're paying attention to is more like they're paying attention to so much. When I say real-time feedback, I don't even necessarily mean like what people on X are saying or people on Instagram are saying or something. I mean more like the metadata that they get to collect from you at every given second. Like they think that they know how something is to be efficaciously used. They think that they know what you want, even when you can't articulate it yourself. All of this is completely untrue. Why? Because what is the time frame that they look over these trends of metadata? It's not like they collected 5 years worth of metadata and decided, people don't like where the start button is. No, they collected that over maybe a month and they made a decision on that. Like they are making decisions on, at the longest on a quarterly basis because they got to report something to the fucking investors. You and me and no tech journalist, no one can keep track of this shit. No one. Like, you want to know why? I mean, yes, the AI, quote unquote AI boom, okay, is, as much about staving off the tech bubble again. First it was blockchain, then it was like ICOs and whatever. Anyway, then it was metaverse and Web3, which where the fuck is that, morons? All these things, right? Now it's AI. Now, yes, this is a bubble AI is part of that bubble in the direct sense. At the same time, AI does have its uses. Part of what, why tech companies are hot about it. Yeah. It pleases investors to inject it into fucking everything. Okay. Cause it looks like something new and hot, even if it's not. All right. But the main reason is that it is actually useful to them. It's genuinely useful. You may look at it and go, well, this sucks. This doesn't do shit for me. But maybe it's not for you. I mean, the most confusing aspect for a lot of people, especially people my age, and I'm 43 right now, is you think that, your technologies are consumer focused. They're not. Okay. I mean, you may be the edge use, but and I don't mean the browser, but it's not about consumer focus, right? It's about investor appeasement. Okay. And so there's things that have to be done to allow for that. And the easy way to appease investors is like, oh, look, we're making this change. And it's based on this metadata. And we think that it's going to, make blah, 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 people happy and more efficient and whatever. And of course, that never really happens. But regardless, it sounds good. And so that's the thing. But also the part you don't hear is that there are internal uses for a lot of these technologies that are incredibly beneficial for whatever reason to Microsoft, Apple, Google, whoever. Okay. So this is the thing is, and take it from somebody who has run a tech podcast and who has listened to a lot of tech podcasts in a very real sense. There's almost no point. And I've been saying this for a few years now, like just read the press releases that come from the companies, because that's the closest thing to reality you're going to get. Everything else is honestly supposition. Now, I mean, if you want to speak to like tech on a more cultural context on like, okay, what this more abstract technology, like say the smartphone that the person asked about, how is that changing our lives? What is that doing to our brains? Okay, there's a conversation to be had perhaps around that, but like commentating on like the actual industries and so like, I don't think that there's a point at all. And I mean, it's hilarious. I see a lot of these big, like around the Firefox situation that happened. I see a lot of these big, like tech, commentators, whatever on YouTube in particular. And, they're all like, oh, Firefox should be this, Firefox should be that. Should what? According to who? Like, by what metric should they do any XYZ? Like, where does this authority come from of like, is there that I'm not aware of, aside from maybe the art of computer programming? That's about the closest thing I think in computer science we have to a Bible. I was just reading Donald Knuth's actually latest entry in that just came out this year. But anyway, there is no Bible that says, oh, software should be this, and an operating system should do this and shouldn't do this and blah, blah. Like there's no 10 commandments to computers. I mean, there's made up ones, just like in Torah, or perhaps wildly misunderstood might be the more accurate term. But regardless, there's made up ones, but there's no rules here, folks. But you're like, oh yeah, Firefox is selling off my privacy, and that's why I'm going to use LibreWolf. What the fuck? Like, okay, you care about your privacy. That's fine, but like, what guarantees? What do you have that LibreWolf is going to do anything right? Like, what? There's no rules here, in everything. The way, like how the industry itself makes money, all of it's completely changed. It is so different, honestly, since like 2020, than it had been for the previous 40 years. There was a time where, yes, there seemed to be very specific rules that you expected, okay, and that you could count on, and where, changes took time, right? Like we didn't get these. I mean, yeah, we would get updates, on Windows XP or something, but like for the big stuff, yeah, maybe in a couple of years we'll get a Service Pack 1. Oh yeah, then maybe we'll get Service Pack 2. Then maybe we'll get Service Pack 3 or whatever. But it would take a lot of time. That is no longer the case. This stuff changes all the time. It's not only that, but like, it's the wackiest thing that you could basically fresh install on 2 separate computers Windows 11. And neither of those, and in fact, I bet you could make them the same exact computer. And Windows 11 will have little things that are different on each one, even though it's the same fucking machine. Same model, same everything. Windows 11 looks different on every single machine. And I don't mean like it's the wallpaper. I mean, there are major UI differences between them. It's a fucking mess. Okay. Well, that's why I buy Apple. All right. Good for you. Like, but you think Apple isn't prone to this? I mean, they're doing a major refresh end of this month, or end of in the summer. They're supposed to be announcing it anyway. We'll see. But that's besides the point. Okay. Linux, of course, whole different animal depending upon what what distro you're using and so on. But this is my point: is there is an addiction to metadata really around the entire world in every single industry, but particularly in the tech industry, to where it is completely impossible to keep up with shit. Stuff changes just all the time. And many times it's changed for change's sake, again, to appease investors. Other times it is for a change that somehow benefits the company more so than the idea that it benefits the consumer. Because the old idea was that, if you appease the consumer, then the company makes money. That's not true anymore. So go ahead and keep listening to them. I do sometimes just for the comfort. I mean, like listening to a cybersecurity podcast. All right, there's usefulness there because, learning about new attacks and everything. Steve Gibson still has the best podcast on the planet, and I mean that. Security Now is fucking king, okay, and can go forever if it wants to. But, a lot of the other stuff, like, what are you people talking about? And it's just true for AI, like I told you before, or in a recent episode. You can wake up reading one thing about AI, you go to sleep, and it could be complete, and it'll be the exact opposite, completely different. Like anybody's commentary on AI, like if you think you have an opinion about AI right now that's valid, okay, and that's the same opinion you had last week, you're out of touch. You're out of touch. Like you don't know, okay, what's going on. I mean, it's part of the reason I was going to do like more of an AI podcast, but like you'd have to do it 3, 4, 5 times a day, to like actually be consistently accurate. Otherwise, you're feeding people bullshit because it was true yesterday, but it ain't true today. And I mean, and it is moving that fast. There is so much going into this. Okay. I mean, it's like people are like, oh yeah, I don't know, Ubuntu sucks, right? Or they say Ubuntu's great. Well, how about that? Ubuntu's great. And it's like, oh, when's the last time you used Ubuntu? 6 years ago. What? Your opinion is completely invalid. This industry moves too fucking fast. It just moves too fast. It's running off of data, so much data. Now that data is becoming far better collated, to where, these companies think that they can act upon it, and those actions are going to happen with Windows, it's every 2 weeks, right? You can get, even in the stable channel, you can get a new version of Windows every 2 weeks. Android, completely new version every month. Multiple Google Play updates, throughout. I mean, just see how many times, like, if you're, kind of anal about it, like I am with updating apps. I mean, the Google app, I think, updates can update like once a day, even more if it needed to. Like the changes are just, you cannot keep track. You can try and watch for like overall trends. I mean, the overall trend is technocracy, but you can try to watch for overall trends, but to say that you have like something necessarily deeply meaningful based around, what Microsoft or Apple or whoever is doing. No, I don't think so. And hey, folks, you want to unsubscribe from me or whatever, like, do it. Okay. I'm telling you the reality that this is such a shit show. Silicon Valley is a complete shit show. It's trying to clean up its mess with AI, and that's going to lead to differing things. And, but they think, oh, well, this is going to lead to AGI or ASI, right? Super intelligence. Not going to happen. Whatever. Okay. But I mean, even their incentives are completely skewed. And also, I'm saying you're out of touch. I'm saying they're out of touch also with reality. Like they're so in the system, they can't see the forest for the trees. They don't know what's going on. So this is just a reality check. Okay. Again, we can paint some broad strokes, but a lot of the specifics, they're changing too fast to even bother to talk about it. Disagree with me. Have the conversation, like email me or message me, whatever. And just, you can, like if you think I'm wrong, tell me about it. Okay. Okay. Again, cybersecurity is like the only thing you could really, keep talking about, because it's a good thing to let people know what they should do. Steps they should take, best practices, what's going on, all that, like that's useful. But everything else, come on. Like, are you really getting, well, let me put it this way. Like there's not even really, another thing that I think we're all kind of like messed up with is we think that like, and there's something to be said for doing an ecosystem play. And I've talked about that. Okay. Where you stick within a certain company's ecosystem for security reasons, convenience reasons, whatever else. Okay. And I'm not saying that that's invalid, but what I am saying is that really doesn't matter what ecosystem you choose. Like they're all equally, more or less equally advantageous and equally fucked. I mean, maybe in little different ways here and there, like they have an advantage here, disadvantage here, but they're all just as fucked. So, this idea of like, whoa, team Apple, team Google, team whatever, stop. Just pick one and just go. Whatever you've invested the most time in and like are the most comfortable with, that's the best thing to do, because that's the one where you can, if there was a security issue, you could react the quickest to probably and know what to do, or again, just react well enough, quickly enough. So there we go. How about that nice moratorium? So I guess I answered the question. Are smartphones there? No, nothing is there. It's all fucked. No, it's not all fucked. I still love using computers. I'm just saying that, like, I mean, look, really, if you want to go back to how tech operated, like 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, like ditch the smartphone, go grab a really nice MP3 player. And I don't mean a smartphone MP3 player. I mean a real MP3 player, no touch screen. Okay. Rock a Linux machine. And because there's great software that you can run on Linux on any OS really, where, you can still do take advantage of some modern things like audiobooks, right? Like you can use Open Audible. I mean, I have that on my Fedora box, or G-Potter, right, to listen to podcasts. I mean, like the options are there where you can do this, or if you have a Windows machine, hell, you can run BlueStacks if you really wanted to, but then you're still leaning into that phone thing. But I mean, you can do it, just understand that, like, and I think it's a valid thing to do as well. But, the world is very much passing you by, but also conversely, don't feel bad about that because no one can keep up with it. No one. Not even the people that work for these fucking tech companies can keep up with it. They're losing their minds as much as you are. I assure you of that. There's no confidence here. So, there's no confidence in this whole thing. So anyway, I am not saying stop using tech. I am just saying that, like, everything is completely changed. You need to basically completely remap, rewire, everything you think about the tech industry, and not only that, but you have to stay consistently agile. You can never build neural pathways around it again, because what's true, an hour ago is no longer true in this industry. Okay. That's the reality. Now, but to speak in some broad strokes, let's get back to your question. So, hi, Brian. Thank you so much for bringing back the Q&A. I've missed it. I read all that. Okay. I loved your conversation on smartwatches and how they're just not quote unquote there yet. But that leads me to the question, are smartphones quote unquote there yet? What I mean by it, can the smartphone finally replace the PC? I have a Galaxy S24. I don't feel like DeX is totally there yet for a desktop, but it feels awfully close. What are your thoughts? Oh, great one. Okay. So let's answer this. Yeah. Samsung, like, DeX has done so little. And in fact, like, even separate DeX hardware or software has stopped being developed in the past year, particularly say for Windows, that I feel like Samsung is really just leaving that behind, which is unfortunate because I think it's a really cool idea. I mean, like the classic Ubuntu One idea that your smartphone is your computer, no matter what you connect it to and where you connect it to, and how you use it. And, and even Windows Phone had that concept with, was that Continuum, right? Really, really cool ideas. And Samsung's the only one that was really pushing for that. Now, it does appear, based upon code review, or data mining, I guess we would say, that, well, openly, Google has stated, okay, you're using Android, so I'm going to talk about Android here first. Google has openly stated that they are they're pushing for Linux apps to run natively on Android. And you can actually get into, a bash shell to more or less be able to do that. I have not messed with this at all. This is going to be, I think, a part of Android 16, and I don't do betas right now, so not even there. And running the betas is nonsense because, like I just said, Google may put a feature into a beta, but we've seen this over and over again where they will actually remove features from a beta. It will never come out on the official release and will actually never come out, even though it was in an official public beta at one point. So you can't count on that shit. And that's part of the reason I don't bother with betas anymore, because it's not really a valid preview of what you're going to get when the stable version finally comes out of a new operating system. Okay. This is just as true for every operating system. It's not just Android, but that's kind of the point. Okay. So we know that Linux, or that Google has been pushing for, to have Linux apps run on this. We also know in the code itself that there are enhancements being made to a desktop version of Android within Pixel hardware itself. Okay. So the idea would be that Pixels may soon have something akin to DeX, where you can plug it into a hub of some kind, or you can do it wirelessly and it'll connect to mouse and keyboard and a monitor and turn into a desktop computer. Okay. Again, I'm not against the idea. I think it's a wonderful idea. So that said, but Samsung really seems to have been like they just haven't done a whole lot with DeX, frankly. And they feel like they're backpedaling on it. So, and that might not be true, but that is the way it feels. So let's talk about it. I mean, yeah, if we could get that desktop environment a more, efficient desktop environment, I guess I'll say, then, that could certainly open things up for if a smartphone is quote unquote there yet, as in, can it replace the PC? But let's just talk about it in its kind of native form factor, as well as like what accessories kind of exist to be able to do that. So and I've mentioned this, and I don't know if it inspired your question, but regardless, I've mentioned this, I basically can use so I have a Pixel 9 Pro XL. That is way too long of a name. I have that, and I can connect a Bluetooth mouse and a Bluetooth keyboard to it. Actually, I could put a hub on it, and, I could connect wired ones if I wanted to. And I can, even put the, what's exactly on the screen in 9:16, or I can flip it, rotate it to where it's the widescreen type. And I can put that up onto a monitor, onto a computer monitor or a TV or something. You don't need to do DeX or anything like that, but it's just going to be a mirror and size of the screen of your, sizes and aspect ratio of the screen of your smartphone. So in that sense, yeah, like I can connect all these peripherals and it can become, very close to what I would use as a computer, just with a very small screen or with overly sized things on a very large screen. You get my point. So in that sense, like it's there. And I have to say this, a lot of the features, and understand me, like Pixel devices particularly, I'm sure this is just as true for Samsung. And actually I know it's true for iPhones as well, but so it's probably true for all smartphones, but like the amount of features that exist within these things, I'm somebody who actually studies operating systems, and like, I can't find them all. And I certainly can't keep track of them all. It's insane. But some of the features, you think like some of the big ones, like Magic Eraser, right? Those are actually much better when you're using a mouse. And the reality is that other than, playing PC games, discounting streaming or GeForce Now, because you still need another computer to stream from, right? Discounting games, I can pretty much do everything I do on a laptop at the very least on my Pixel device. And I'm sure that's just true for a Galaxy S24. And I mean everything. And iOS, a little bit of a different story, but certainly with an Android smartphone, I mean, I can torrent, there's a long list of stuff. I mean, I can use LumaFusion. I can actually do very nice video editing. I've done it where I've edited video using LumaFusion, in fact, on a computer monitor from my Pixel. So yeah, in a way they are there, in a very real sense, to where they could completely replace the computer for you. Now, it'd be nice if they had more multitasking. Clearly, I think Google is aware of that, and that's why they're working on the desktop view of Android overall. There's another reason for that, but that's going to get to our next question. And this is why, like in Android, why you have these folding phones that are becoming, and why Google's actually invested, in the larger folding phone, because, they see that as this is like the future, for them, this is the future computer. And, we're going to kind of go all in on that. I mean, notice that, again, like Chrome OS and Android have basically melded now, as to where it's funny because it seemed for a while that actually Google saw its fortunes in Chrome OS. Now the opposite has happened. And that's not even getting into the fact that like Android is no longer developed in the open. That doesn't mean it's not still AOSP and open source at its base, but it's now being developed entirely internally at Google. Certainly a lot more to be said around that, but we won't get into that here. But yes, even doing this, everything I do for this podcast, and I mean everything, even like the thumbnail generation is so easy to do, obviously, with, many apps of your choice that can do generative AI and all this stuff. Even some of the, I thought this was funny. Like one of the YouTube channels I really like is Rick Beato, and he was on Rick Rubin's podcast, and, he came right out and said, he's like, yeah, he says, I do my own thumbnails. I do them right on my smartphone, and he has like 5 million subscribers. He's one of the biggest YouTube channels out there. So understand that even the biggest, some of the biggest people in this space or in different aspects, like in many industries, are doing a lot of things from their smartphone. Okay. So yeah, my overall point is, the smartphones kind of are there, and you can get really great quality out of it. In fact, I mentioned this to Rob at one point, because I was talking about all the stuff in the studio and everything. And, I got all this fancy equipment and I love it. Okay. And I remember telling him, I was like, honestly though, the best video and audio, and I'm not using cheap shit here, folks. Okay. But I told him, I was like, the best video and audio that I've ever seen was just using my Pixel 9. The audio was super, super deep and crisp. The video looked phenomenal. Like all this equipment. And like, if I just want to do a show, man, I could do the whole goddamn thing, with just 2-3 apps, from on a smartphone. It's insane. So yes, it depends on what you do with the computer. I'm sure there's some things, and I mean, again, AAA gaming and a lot of that, like that's a whole other, you could get creative around it, I'm sure, but, and Google is doing weird things with Google Play games where they're trying to make it so that PC games can get ported to Android. So, we're looking at that. I mean, it seems to be that Google's plan here is really, again, to have like Android devices, replace computers. And not only that, but like they want it, they probably want to take on the Steam Deck. They want to take on, whatever Microsoft's doing and so on. So anyway, but that's a very long-term view, I think. But some of the groundwork's there for sure. And it could all change in a heartbeat, Google. So yeah, so they're there, and again, if you don't mind the small screen, or if you connect it to a huge screen, but you don't mind the, the gigantic ass apps and everything, you really could get away with it, and I mean, I can remember, when smartphones were coming into prominence, and we as the royal we weren't considering the net negatives of smartphones. And a lot of us were like, yeah, oh man, this would be so cool if I could just do everything from the smartphone, And I think part of that came from that we think of, our desktops and laptops as like work machines, perhaps more so than anything, unless you have like a dedicated gaming machine or something. And I get how that is like, but I mean, it was 10 times worse back then, but it's still, certainly COVID didn't help things now. And so some people feel that like the smartphone is kind of their private space. I don't know. It depends on that can change. And I mean, that can, that has ebbs and flows. There's times where I feel like my phone is my work device and my computer is my play device. There's times where I feel the opposite. So, again, I'm not laying down any hard proclamations here other than that. Yes, we've really gotten to the point where, most things you really, I mean, again, if you need full on Photoshop, of course, different story, blah, blah, blah. But most things, especially with a lot of AI tools, which were developed before before ChatGPT was a thing. Okay. Like Meta and Google meant it when they said, oh, we've already had this technology, meaning LLMs and everything. It's like, we've had this for years. We didn't think it was a good idea to have it out to the people. But anyway, they're already baking it into stuff. I mean, just look, like the Pixel 6 in 2021, like the whole argument around the Tensor chip was that it was designed for AI functionality. Okay. And to have, the best, broad path, like AI functionality. And that's before ChatGPT was unleashed. That's before any of this shit was. So, I mean, yes, I know OpenAI existed before that, and there were different models of ChatGPT that existed before that. Please don't get that shit in the comments. I understand history. Okay. But you get my point. So, like these features were always going to be a part of it. It's not like, in that sense, it's not like AI changed things that much other than, maybe some of the stuff came to public sooner. And with the results you get from it, you can see that, maybe this should have stayed in beta for another 10 years. But anyway, so smartphones, like really, I do think they are there. And there are plenty of times where I ask myself, and like, I love having this equipment and I love being able to do all the things that I do. But like at the same time, it's like, yeah, what if I just recorded the podcast on my smartphone and just uploaded it from there? Because it looks so damn good and sounds so good. But anyway, okay. So enough of that. I hope that answers your question. Though let me be clear that I do not, for health reasons, mental and physical and spiritual, really, they're all tied together. I do not recommend, like relying solely on your smartphone. I think that they are toxic devices by their very nature at the same time. Maybe you can build a non-toxic relationship with it, but then you still get into, in my opinion, varying health concerns, and really spiritual concerns. Maybe that's when people are going to toss out what I'm saying, but I don't think so. I think you people actually want me talking a lot more about spirituality and mysticism and all that. Like that's the feedback I'm getting, especially from the last Q&A, is that's what you people want me talking about anyway. But I do think there's concerns there. So, okay. That's that. Now, are there any good Android? Here's the next question. Let's get into it. And because boy, we are going long. Are there any good Android tablets these days that aren't Amazon or Samsung? Great question. So, in my opinion, without Amazon or Samsung, let's take a moment on this. Okay. So Samsung's tablets, are generally considered the best in the Android space, but you have to deal with Samsung's software. So that's pretty much a no-go, which is probably why the brilliant person said, that's not Samsung, right? Yeah, exactly. The tablet market overall in Android is a weird one. I'm going to touch on that, but Amazon in general has been considered, with their Fire tablets, and rightfully so, have been considered the low end, right? If Samsung's the high end, Amazon's the low end. And it's shit. And like, you have to, add the Play Store, and like, there's just a lot of little things you need to do to get it to the point where it operates in the way that is, in my opinion, user-friendly and, gives the quote unquote consumer the best experience. This is one of those things where, like I said, everything you think that you knew before is no longer true. Since Amazon brought on Panos Panay after Panos left Microsoft, their Surface division and Windows division, Panos Panay, Amazon has come out this year and said, we are no longer, we are going to do premium experiences. We are no longer appeasing the lower end. And now you could say that this is entirely because Panos came out. I don't think it's entirely because of that. I also think that basically, there's just, from other companies, there's better hardware for around the same price as what Amazon was offering, the Kindle tablets and whatever else for, that young people, want. Like you give a kid, an Amazon tablet, and then give it to like a 6-year-old. And then the 6-year-old's going to say, can I play Fortnite on it? And the answer is no. And it's like, then what the hell is this thing? And I don't like that that's the mentality, but that's the mentality, And so, can I play Genshin Impact on it? Nope. Oh, well, then it's not a computer, or it's not, it's not it's not a smartphone or a tablet that's worthwhile. It's not a computing device that means anything to me. So Amazon knows that. And they're going for the premium market, and they're making a complete shift in their thought process. So yeah, it's totally valid to say no, I don't want anything from Amazon right now. But let's be clear, in the near future, the plan is right now that it's not going to be the low end anymore. Maybe they'll still put out low end stuff, but they're looking to go to the high end. And I'm very curious to see if they end up whole cloth eliminating the Amazon App Store and just finally making the deal with Google. I feel like Panos might be able to pull that off. But anyway, that's besides the point. So, but it's just important that this is a perception that's going to change. Now, not wanting to buy from Amazon entirely is of course a completely valid way of thinking. But regardless, in my opinion, you basically have like two choices. In a world without LG, in the mobile device space, you have the Pixel tablet, or you have like the OnePlus Pro tablet. OnePlus has been making a lot of great moves, speaking conventionally, and their ecosystem can pretty much match anybody else's tech ecosystem out there. Okay, as far as what's available, pretty much. I mean, we talked about that a bit during the smartwatch conversation in last week's Q&A, but it's still there. Okay, and so, going either of those directions, I think, are really the way to go. Now, the Pixel tablet might be of a little bit more interest, partly because that desktop view that's being developed, you're already seeing features of the developed desktop view within Android being taken advantage of on a Pixel tablet. So basically what I'm getting at is a Pixel tablet will likely in the future, because it's already happening, have a lot more, like PC replacement functionality. Okay. So it'll have broader functionality, and it's probably going to have much better software support even than OnePlus will offer. Though I could be wrong about that. But it's going to have about the best software support you could ask for. Even though I don't think the Pixel tablet has been selling well, we already know that Google was going to make a Pixel tablet 2 and they canceled the plans for that. It's not clear if the plans have been canceled for a Pixel tablet 3, but they are definitely walking, not running in that space. And which is kind of a shame because, Google made the best tablet in history, that being the Nexus 7 was the fucking king forever and was a valid device for 10 years. It's amazing, frankly. So, I mean, you had to put Lineage OS on it, but that's also part of the reason that I recommend buying, like Pixel hardware, is because of the dev community around it and the fact that like Pixel devices are usually what the CIA uses, to put their custom software on and everything. Like Pixel devices just have really diverse, options as far as like other whole operating systems that can be run on them, as compared to, and they get updated as well as compared to perhaps other devices. So, that's part of the reason that I recommend, Pixel devices in general, is just because of the options you have. Like, you think you're buying into Google's ecosystem. No, actually, it's the only way to get out of Google's ecosystem is to buy a Pixel device. To get out of it entirely, you'd have to use a Pixel device, which, would seem ironic, but I mean, it's part of the reason that phones that Google still makes phones. Everybody's like, why is Google making phones? Samsung's eating them hand over fist. Xiaomi's killing them elsewhere, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, you don't get it. Like, remember I told you earlier how I said there are tech moves made that are not for the consumer, that are not for you, they're for somebody else. This is one of those instances where, like it's interesting to look into, like, who buys the most Pixel devices? I wonder. Anyway, so there you go. Yeah, I think the Pixel tablet is a great choice. If you want the dock, and get into all the, like, the Nest Home stuff, I mean, that's certainly something you can look into. But regardless, just for the software updates and options alone, like, the Pixel tablet really stands tall for me. Unless, again, if you're in the OnePlus ecosystem, and actually the OnePlus, that has like really cool accessories, the Pro tablet. So if you're looking for it, if someone were looking for it for a, computer replacement, it could do it. But Pixel tablet, definitely, top marks, as far as tablets go. But in general, like, all tablets fall behind the iPad. I mean, that's just the reality. I don't like it, but it's just the reality. So let's get into some other questions. Let's see. Should you start a secret society? Yes, you should start. All right. I'm going to save that question about secret societies. But yes, should you start a secret society? Yes, 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 yes. Why? Okay, because like, look, again, like I said in that episode I recorded with Sec, secret societies are what run the world. Like, it's not governments. Okay, governments. Here's an analogy for you. Okay. Authoritarianism is a drug. All right. Governments are not, well, okay, forget about the authoritarianism part. Governments are the drug dealers, but they're not the drug makers. It's everything outside of that. Okay. And we need to be a little more broad in our term of secret society, but it's everything outside, Larry, it's things outside of that that are actually, or above that are actually like the drug makers. Stopping the drug dealers doesn't stop the drug. Okay. So, like playing in government, what? You think like maybe you're helping like cut the, I don't know, what do they call that? Like cut the meth or something so that it's not as strong when it finally hits the streets or some shit. Like, no, people are still hooked on meth. You fucking idiots. So no, don't bother with the drug dealers. If you're actually like wanting freedom in your life, you need to know about the drug makers and you need to play at their level. So anyway, okay. I'm not going to get into that, but there's a very short answer for you. I'll dive deeper into that and people have other questions they can ask it. Okay. Man, this is going to go long. Okay. So let's get into the question here. This is message to me. Oh, where is it? Glad to see the Q&A come back. Let's fucking go. Damn straight. Related question for next time. What are your thoughts on the Nephilim? What were they? Did they exist? Were they giants? Did institutions like the Smithsonian cover up evidence of their existence? So that's like 5 questions. Okay. Put me in, coach. I'll do it. All right. So first thing, did institutions like the Smithsonian cover up evidence of their existence? The Smithsonian has covered up a lot of evidence of a lot of things that are of high strangeness. Like it's interesting to note that the Smithsonian is actually exempt from a lot of laws that require government action or some government actions and agencies to be open about what they found and do. The Smithsonian oddly gets, again, they're exempt from that. So the quick answer on that is yes. Does that mean that there were Nephilim in the Grand Canyon? Maybe. Okay. That is a completely separate subject that I may have to save for another time because otherwise I'll be here forever. But there's a little short version on the last part of that. So let's go back to it. What are your thoughts on the Nephilim? What were they? Did they exist? Were they giants? Okay. Let's spend a second on what, where do we get this question even from about what are the Nephilim? Okay. How did we ever hear about this thing these things called Nephilim? And then I want to touch on, were they giants? And then touch on what were they? Did they exist? Okay. So we kind of have to answer these questions in a little bit of a different order. So the Nephilim, this is a word that exists in Torah. It also exists in the book of Ezekiel. So it exists in the first 5 books of Moses. That's Torah, right? Or the Pentateuch. And yes, I know Talmud Torah. Torah can include everything up to the Zohar and beyond. So depending upon who you're asking. Okay. So I should be careful in my terms, but I think I'm actually going to feel a lot more comfortable with using the term Pentateuch anyway going forward, even though I've already talked about all this stuff a billion times over on Q&As over the years. Okay. So in the book of Genesis, this is our first mention. Is the book of Genesis chronologically the first mention, as in that was the first part written about them? Well, chronologically, as far as timeline, that would seem to be the first, but is it the first written? That's a whole other subject that we might touch on a little bit. That's actually pretty important to this conversation. So we end up with the word Nephilim in the book of Genesis, particularly chapter 6, verse 4, very famous verse. Okay. And then, I'll read it quick. Quote, the Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The same were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown. Okay, now that question about giants comes from that in the King James Version of the Bible, and not just the King James Version, but also in the Septuagint, which we talked about a ton last week, that the concept, the idea, the theory, that the Septuagint is actually the original Hebrew Bible not the Hebrew language version, that we have it backwards. And this question that was asked, I think if I were to believe that there is, some synchronicities and that, perhaps there was a divine hand here, I'd almost believe it, because this very question actually plays into that theory of the Septuagint being the autograph, not Biblica, Hebraica, that it leads into that possibility. It's more of that evidence. So I think it's shockingly apropos, dare I say synchronous, that this question gets asked this week, and inspired by last week's conversation, because they actually fit, I think. Anyway, okay, keep going. So in the Septuagint, like I said, so in the King James Version, Nephilim in Genesis 6 verse 4 is translated as giants. And that comes out of the Septuagint and also the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible from, it's not BC, it's in the CE, okay, that the Vulgate finally got put together in Latin. That also uses the term of giant, or particularly the Septuagint uses the word gigantes. And, that's where the idea that they were giants comes from. Now, we got to talk about that word gigantes, but let's keep going a little bit on where we hear these terms. The other place that we learn about the Nephilim is in Numbers, the book of Numbers, chapter 13, verses 32 and 33. I'll read it here. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come of the Nephilim, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. Now, that verse leads you to think that in our own sight we were seen as grasshoppers as we were in their sight, meaning that clearly these Hebrew spies, these Israelite spies, see the Anakim, as in Anak, the Anakim sees them as giants, right? Because they're like grasshoppers. So that's also part of where I think, like the King James translators and even the Septuagint, if it was a translation, but maybe it was the original, would get this idea of gigantes, of using giant, right? That they were giant. The next one is the only mention that I'm aware of outside of the Pentateuch, and that is out of the book of Ezekiel, which is an incredibly important book to have a mention of anything in. Okay. And I'm not going to go into necessarily why on all of that, other than Ezekiel is one of the most important, there's books that for, when you're considering, shall we say, a mystical or Kabbalistic interpretation, okay, of the Tanakh, of the Old Testament, of Torah. There are certain books that honestly are more important than others. Okay. Ezekiel is one of those really important ones. The most important, of course, would be the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon. But which you can extrapolate, according to the Kabbalist, you can extrapolate all truth from the Song of Solomon. But the book of Ezekiel is definitely a very important book, and one that deserves a lot of exploration, especially contextual exploration, because it is a book that is out of order within itself. But that's besides the point. But it is part of the point that is interesting, is that the Nephilim are mentioned in it. And this is from chapter 32, verse 27. It says, "They lie with the warriors, the Nephilim of old, who descended to Sheol with their weapons of war. They placed their swords beneath their heads and their shields upon their bones, for the terror of the warriors was upon the land of the living." So, of course, Sheol is the grave, right? Sheol is this kind of like underworld that both the good and the bad, quote unquote, go to. And people just kind of walk around, forever underneath there. You can kind of imagine a scene from like Barbarella, where all these people are just like walking around in the Black Queen's like maze. Anyway, so we get a mention of the Nephilim there, which is also interesting, and kind of points at some potential interpretations that the Hebrews had of, what the Nephilim were. Okay. So we gotta unpack a lot of this. Now, just based on Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, just on that mention, you have multiple interpretations of what's going on here. So the word Nephilim, let's talk about that first. The word Nephilim originally just means, in Hebrew, just means fallen ones. Okay. That's all that it means. Now, you got to be, there's particulars to have here, okay? Because there's the Nephilim, which also in the King James Version would actually get translated as sons of God, okay? Come into the daughters of men and have children through them. Now, the children are called the Elioid or the Eliud, and those are, the quote unquote men of renown, okay? But I think there can be a lot of confusion in what are we talking about when we're talking about the Nephilim? Are we talking about, the fallen ones, or are we talking about their children, right? Because when you get to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 32, when it's talking about the Nephilim, then it seems more like it's referencing the Eliuds instead of the Nephilim themselves, right? Because it's these warriors of renown. And we know that, why does it translate to warrior? Because it's saying, it's using the Hebrew word Giberim Nephilim or Nephilim. So the word Giberim is, means like mighty, okay? Like mighty warrior. Like today, if you were talking to somebody like in Israel, if you're talking to somebody in Hebrew, and, they were using the term Giberim or something along, they'd be talking about like some great hero or some great champion, maybe even like an athlete or something like that. So the word Giberim means mighty. It's a very ancient word. So, and again, like these warriors of renown that Genesis chapter 6, verse 4 is talking about, which are, again, not the Nephilim, but actually the Eliot. My point in bringing all this up is just that these things get interchangeable. Okay. So I don't know that there's going to be a need to be particular about the Eliud and the Nephilim. I'm going to wrap them up more or less as the Nephilim. Okay. But Nephilim, we'll just say like that just means fallen ones. So the most common interpretation of this is that it's fallen angels that came down, had sex with women, with human women, found them to be very fair, and depending upon what translation you're reading. Interestingly, the idea, and this is also in the New Testament, okay, but I know it's also popular in Islam, the idea that women cover their heads, cover their hair, like a woman's glory is her hair, is to keep the Nephilim from seeing that they're a beautiful woman, to keep them from seeing them as a woman. So this idea of the Nephilim has, again, it's not just in Islam, it's also in the New Testament about, like a woman should cover her head when she's praying, right? She's actual, and there's something to extract from that out of the works of Paul. Okay. That's in 1 Corinthians 11, right? There's something to extract from that. Okay. That I think will actually help color what exactly are the Nephilim. Okay. But anyway, so one idea is that they're fallen angels. Another idea is just that, well, if you go into like, say, Zechariah Sitchin's work, I think his argument would be that the Nephilim are the Anunnaki, right? So that they're aliens. Okay. The others that somehow they were just some like giants of some kind, the gigantes, which that word in the Greek comes from a people. Okay. The gigantes. And again, we're going to expand more on whether or not they were actually giant. Okay. Because also that word Giberim, the word Giberim, it can mean that you're giant, but really it just means mighty. Okay. So it just means you have great strength, great ability. So the idea that the Nephilim are giants, as in like they have tall stature or whatever, may not, doesn't have to be true. Okay. They could actually just be really powerful, but not actually giants. Okay. Now, when we read the verse out of Numbers, okay, which said that, we were like grasshoppers, that would seem to directly say that they were giants. But again, we'll touch on that in a second. So anyway, reel this baby back in. Okay. So we have fallen angels, we have potentially the Anunnaki, or they're just giants, or another, and this could actually, or it's a mixture of all these, because honestly, to some degree would be, them being giants would fit in with this interpretation as well, is that the sons of God were actually the descendants of Adam and Eve's son, Seth, and that the daughters of man were the descendants of Cain, of Adam and Eve's son, Cain. And because, he's condemned or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Now, the reason that, and where you could kind of put together that part might be true, that the Nephilim are actually just the descendants of Seth, is, when you read Josephus, okay, from the 1st century CE, when you read Josephus, he writes about how that Adam and Eve were huge. They themselves were giants. Like Adam was 16 feet tall, or, and Eve was 12 or something like that. Okay. So there's precedent that the first family of Torah, were giants. They were gigantic. And so the idea that the descendants of Seth would be called giants, yeah, maybe. And, this gets into originally we were perfect and pure, and the further genetically we got away from that, the more we devolved until now we're at the point that being over 6 feet is considered gigantic, and everybody's short and blah, whatever. Okay. You get where I'm going with that. So there's, some interesting things to pull from, this idea, or these different theories, but there's the possibility that, okay, we're just talking about descendants of Seth and descendants of Cain. I don't think so. Okay. I know that's a popular one with Seventh-day Adventists and with Ellen White. In fact, I think she'd go so far as to say that they're almost allegorical, the Nephilim were, but regardless, it's not that. Okay. Are they the fallen ones? As in, are they fallen angels? No, because this whole, war in heaven, kind of there's 200, a third of the angels followed Satan and all this that's all not what you think it is at all. Okay. And it's certainly not anything remotely related to real history. Okay. So the idea that it's fallen angels, no. The idea that it's the Anunnaki might be getting a little bit closer, because there's a lot more mention, particularly in the Book of Enoch, parts of it, the Book of Watchers, or we also have the Book of Giants. We have even the Book of Jubilees. Okay. We have extant, not necessarily autographed, but certainly very ancient accounts of more of these characters, of Nephilim. Okay. Or the Watchers, whatever terms end up getting used for them, but it's clearly referencing the same points within Torah overall. Okay. So this is where you end up, particularly in the Book of Enoch. This is where First Enoch. This is where you end up with the story of them coming down onto Mount Hermon that we talked about last week in the Q&A, where there is written in Greek the oath that supposedly Semyaza and 200 other quote unquote fallen ones, okay, took, that we will all, so that Semyaza basically says, so that I'm not the only one punished, we're all going to take the oath that we're all going to take human women, and they go and do that. Okay. From Mount Hermon. Now, again, it's amazing that we actually have potentially, again, questions on dating to be sure, but potentially in Greek, we actually have the writing of this is where, the fallen ones or the Nephilim came down, and this is where they took their oath from. Fascinating. Okay. And not to be overlooked. So, but I think we need to unpack this a little bit more. Again, we're primarily playing with the 3 verses, okay, out of the Tanakh, out of the Old Testament. We're playing, with what's in Ezekiel, what's in the Book of Numbers, and what's in Genesis 6 verse 4. Okay. So what we get from this, let's answer that question about them being giants. All right. Let's get this out of the way, and then we can kind of keep talking about it. So you have to look at the word, or it's important to look, this is where we want to look at Numbers 13. Okay. Yes, with the Septuagint, they did use the word gigantes. Okay. Pointing at that they were giants. Again, even the word gigantes in Greek also basically doesn't mean that they were necessarily tall. It could, just like Gibarim, it could also just mean that they were just mighty, that they were just really powerful and strong and whatever else. Now, let's take a look at the Anakim. Okay. in, like I said, in Numbers 13, more deeper fashion here. So the Anakim, where does the word Anak come from? Or do we have extra biblical sources for, mention of the Anakim? And we actually do. We are aware during the time, in ancient Egypt, that the Anakim were like, they were recognized, they were a people in Canaan, okay, in the land of Canaan, and that they were enemies of the Egyptian Empire. Okay. So when you read the execration texts out of the Middle Kingdom, they talk about that. So the Anakim existed. Like that part's not really up to debate. But it becomes a question of, okay, so what do we know then? So we know the Anakim existed, at least according to the Egyptians, as well as, the Pentateuch. So what can we know beyond that? So the question becomes, where does the word Anak come from? Like, what is Anak? And this gets to the point about where perhaps the Septuagint is the original and the Hebrew is the translation, right? Or that's part that you could kind of extrapolate that from this. So the word Anak potentially, we got to be careful with that, potentially comes from the word annex, out of, it's A-N-A-X, annex, okay? Well, that's the transliteration anyway, which comes out of Greek mythology, okay? So Anax was like, he was the son of the earth, right? The son of Gaia, and the father of Asterius, okay? So, and we got to talk about Asterius as well, okay? But Anax is, or was, an enemy of, in the mythology, of King Minos. Now, King Minos, son of Zeus. Minos, does that sound familiar? Does that sound kind of like Minoan? Interesting. Mm-hmm. So these Anakim, who are enemies of the Egyptians and enemies of the Israelites, or maybe the Egyptians and the Israelites are the same people. Ding, 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 ding. Yeah, okay. They are, well, again, they're the enemies of the Egyptians and the Israelites, or like I said, same people. And they are, but they're, if they come from the root of Anax, and I'll get into more, we got to talk about Asterius, okay, Anax's son. But these, enemies of the Jews, again, of the ancient Hebrews, of the Israelites, the Egyptians, all the same thing. We're enemies of King Minos, of the king of, or, the progenitor of the Minoans themselves. Son of Zeus, King Minos. I know in the Hercules movie with Lou Ferrigno, which I love, I know Minos is like the bad guy, but anyway. So regardless, that gets into very interesting territory. This is more of that, like, okay, wait, actually, are the Jews from Crete? I mean, we have these associations of their enemies being related to being enemies of Crete and so on. Okay. So beyond that, the question becomes, was Anax himself a giant like his descendants, the Anakim, potentially, were? And the answer is actually yes. Perhaps they were, because we do know his son, Asterius. The claim was, out of the Pausanias, the claim is that Asterius was buried on the island of Lade, and he had bones that were 10 cubits in length. Okay. So he was at least, like 10 feet tall, around there. Cubit is kind of a, not the best, or not the most precise measurement system, but regardless, probably about 10 feet tall, whatever. So yeah, we have a giant here. And that's another reason that, like, the idea that Anak, or the Anakim, come from Anax, again, out of Greek mythology, not Hebrew, is, like there's association there, and pretty good ones. Now, I'm not done yet, because Anax actually is also or Anak, not Anax, but Anak is also a reference in Islam. But in Islam, it's a reference to, like, there was Anak bint Adam, who is the mother. So it's a woman in this case. Okay. But there's still a key here, because Anak is the mother of Og. Okay, now, who is Og? King Og. I mean, in the Talmud, that turns into really, really wacky tales where, like, King Og's teeth grow so much that he can't move anymore. Like, they're like huge, and he has a mountain for a hat and all this stuff. It gets really, really wild. But that's not the only mention we have of King Og. Okay, but Og is, or again, was the was the king of the Amorites. Okay, who, you know, the Amorites directly took on, Moses and his armies. Og also, though, in, depending upon what midrash that you're reading, Og was someone who actually existed before the flood, and in fact, hitched a ride on Noah's Ark. Okay, in fact, actually helped steer Noah's Ark. He was a good guy in the time of Noah, it seems, or at least he was helpful. Like he was such a giant. Og was such a giant that, like, he could steer Noah's Ark with his feet. And he's just holding on to the back of it the whole time. So that definitely fits with the term of Gibarim, that he was mighty, that he was very strong. Okay, that fits there. But this is the explanation. Midrash is like ways of expansions on Torah to try and explain, how there's like, any kind of inconsistencies or oddities that you run into. And saying that King Og survived up until the time of Moses, okay, was basically explaining how can there be Nephilim in, the book of Genesis before the flood, and then also Nephilim in the book of Numbers, and, also mentioned in Ezekiel. Like, how can that be? So the way they explain that is that King Og was a Nephilim, that he actually, survived Noah's Ark, and so again, survived until the time of Moses, but was a giant. So Islam, it says that Anak is actually the mother of King Og. Now, is Og, actually Asterius? Maybe, just different names. But once again, we have this long history of a character like King Og that, yes, indeed, is a giant, just like Asterius, just like the way that, the Israelite spies, claimed that they were grasshoppers compared to the Anakim. Okay. But in my opinion, this is just a side note, the association of the Anakim with Anaks, and that association with the Minoans, with Crete, should not go unnoticed. And the fact that this is preserved in Greek mythology, not in, like Hebrew history. Or at least, not that the more identifiable aspects of where the origin story of the Anakim anyway. Okay. But it is also in Egyptian history. These things should not be ignored. These are very important. Are they oddities? Sure. But I think they start to paint a very interesting picture of what may have really been Jewish history. So again, looking at the book of Numbers, looking at Numbers 13 and Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 32, like the idea that the Nephilim were something that lived and breathed and walked on the earth and certainly were warriors, and were fearsome. It's there in multiple spots. And again, they're really not described. And this is, like I said, this is where it gets confusing, right? Because when Ezekiel's talking about it, is he talking about the Nephilim or is he talking about the Eliud, right? Is he talking about their children or is he talking about the actual fallen ones? And if they're fallen, I mean, because, this raises a big question. If the people in Ezekiel being talked about are the fallen ones, why are they buried? And they go down to Sheol too? I thought they were already spirits and they don't have to go that. And this is part of where the idea that they are fallen angels falls apart. Because, like, I mean, say that to anybody, Jew, Christian, Islamist, like Muslim, it's like, say it to anyone. Okay. You say that, oh yeah, no, we bury angels. They'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Right. And rightfully so. So the idea that it's fallen angels, the idea that somehow like they're the descendants of Seth, who is one of the good guys, and at the same time, are supposed to be, according to the narrative, one of the good guys, and, but then is like, these great warriors or whatever, like that doesn't necessarily fit the narrative either. That falls apart for a bunch of reasons. The idea that they're the descendants of Seth. Anyway. So we can't rock with those, but now let's look again, perhaps at that Anunnaki thing, perhaps at the idea that they were extraterrestrials of some kind. Okay. There is actually no reason whatsoever to ever assume that things coming from the sky in the Old Testament are talking about extraterrestrials, or are talking about, and when you say extraterrestrials, we're talking about things that come from outer space, okay? That come from another planet or something. Like, there is no reason to jump to that conclusion. I'm not saying that it couldn't be right at some points. It could, but there's no reason to jump to that, because anytime this stuff gets talked about, whether it's Elijah going up in the fire, in the Merkabah, going up in the fiery chariot, or it's fire coming down onto, raining down onto Sodom and Gomorrah, or, whatever you're imagining, or it's fallen angels, right? Like talking about, or supposedly fallen ones, right? That's what we should actually say. It's watchers, coming down onto Mount Hermon, or, and walking down from Mount Hermon and so on. Okay. All that's saying, all that any of these things are getting at and saying is that it came from the sky. It came down from the sky. But there's no mention whatsoever of it being like, oh, they came down from outer space. They did, like, I mean, there's really no extrapolations around that, or that lead to that, like, inherently. Okay. And I think we do ourselves a tremendous disservice when we do not, I mean, it's worthwhile to look at, because, this is what I was saying last week, because the Hebrew Bible uses such a simple language. Like, a lot of the words have multiple meanings. Like, the word ruach can mean so many different things. And it can be actually, ruach could be talking as much about the breath of life inside of you as it could be talking about the jet stream from, a flying vehicle. Really, it could. Okay. So that's part of the problem when you have such a when you have such a simple language that has to address seemingly such complex concepts. And again, many times these words have many, many, many meanings. Okay. And that's without even getting into like, oh, do we take the text literally, or is it all allegory, or is it all three? Is it, what? Yeah, okay. Got it? All right. So, but we do ourselves a disservice when we automatically, we just jump to, oh, it's aliens, right? Like the Watchers or the Nephilim are aliens, when it could be way more interesting and it's necessary to explore. No, maybe they just, they came down from the sky in a flying vehicle, but it's like an airplane. It's not a rocket, I mean, spaceships of Ezekiel, I've already written about that, covered that a bunch of times. There is legit stuff there from Joseph Bloomeridge's work, but it doesn't have to be spaceships. It could just be airships. Okay. And when we skip ahead like that, we do ourselves a disservice. The other possibility, and a very good one, is that we could be talking about not extraterrestrials, but interdimensional beings. And I don't think that gets talked about enough. Now, are those angels? Well, this is where you run into another problem. The concept of angels, particularly within Judaism, broader Judaism, okay, because again, there's a lot of different denominations and there's a lot of different interpretations in Judaism, just like there is in Christianity and Islam and everything else, okay? But the concept of angels, there isn't just like one kind of angel. Like there are many kinds of angels. Now that's not even controversial to say, but I think it's even far more complex than saying that there's like, oh, there's cherubim and seraphim and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Like there's a lot of different types of angels. Sometimes angels isn't referencing a being. It could be referencing a force or an energy, something like this. Okay. And so, there's times where like, oh, Jacob's wrestling with an angel, but then there's other times where an angel is like doing something. It's like an effect more than it is like a being. Okay. So you run into that problem with like the question, to some degree, to get to the bottom of what are the Nephilim, you have to answer the question, what are angels? And the answer to that is that the angel, like the concept of angels is wildly complex. It can be all kinds of different things. It's not just one thing. But are the Nephilim one thing? Well, that's part of what we're getting to here. Okay. Now, some would also go so far as to suggest that the Nephilim were actually, and I'm not kidding, were actually lizard people. Laugh all you want, but there is some credibility to this interpretation. Some, not all, some. Okay. Not a lot, just some. And it really comes from, like basically from particularly Roman historians, or, historians of the Roman Empire era, who would talk about some of the things that they would see in what were effectively museums in Rome and Roman provinces. Okay. And when you hear the descriptions of them, these things that are being peddled, are gigantic. They're gigantes. Like, look at the size of this femur, look at the size of, all this stuff. And oh, look, and it has a giant lizard head and blah, blah, blah. Kind of sounds like dinosaurs, doesn't it? Yeah, I know. So, which, I think a lot of historians, if they even take those histories seriously of what people were seeing at these, kind of like fairs and events in the middle of these, of these ancient cities, that'd probably be the most gracious thing that they would say, is that, well, maybe they found like bones of dinosaurs and that's what it was. And they thought it was like the Watchers, or they thought it was the Nephilim or the Gigantes, or, whatever term you want to, that they decided to use. Were there exhibits that showed off, and these were the ancient Anakim? Maybe. Were these basically, suckers born every minute, right? Were we dealing with Roman P.T. Barnums here? Or were these quite serious? We talked about that a little bit last week, and you can put in some, you could certainly have some skepticism, and that's always a good thing to have. But part of what I talked about last week was, depending upon who's telling the history, like, you needed to be pretty serious in what you're laying down. You needed to be pretty exacting, and that if you thought it was bullshit, you need to say it's bullshit. Okay. Depending upon what these histories are written for, who they were written for, and so on. So I would not go so far as to say that everything that was shown off at these, ancient roadshows or museums was bullshit. Were the lizard people likely dinosaurs? Yeah, but then did dinosaurs ever evolve, like the Troodon, into some kind of bipedal, intelligent, or should I say sapient species? Well, there's good evidence for that too. Does that lead to the conclusions of David Icke? No, not even close. It's just that we have a very weird history on this planet that we know very little about. Lots of species that commingled, coexisted, or didn't coexist, but evolved at some point. The idea that humanity is the only sapient species on the planet is, we'll talk about height of hubris. So I don't want to get too lost on all of this, but do I think that the Nephilim are aliens? That they're like from outer space? No, I don't think that at all. Is there the possibility that like maybe they were from Mars or the moon or something like that? Okay. Yeah, maybe in that sense, but like not from, not from these far off planets. But this gets into a whole other conversation. I'm trying to debunk like the common ancient alien hypothesis, because that has to go away. Okay. And because it's based far too much in science fiction tropes that are just that. They are tropes and creations of fiction. Okay. And you need to think past those things to get what we're talking about here. Okay. In some ways, I really wish we could get rid of the word alien itself, because it's something that just has too much baggage. It has too many preconceptions. It's a huge problem. Okay. Do I think that the Nephilim were Homo sapiens? All right, I'll just come right out and say it. No, they were not Homo sapiens. Beyond that, a lot of things are up for grabs. But that is not as crazy a statement as it might sound. Why? Because we, Homo sapiens, coexisted with many different types of humans. They coexisted with Denisovans. They coexisted with Neanderthals. And we keep finding more, ancestral species that we coexisted with. So to say that somehow, ancient peoples encountered, the Anakim encountered these giants, and that they were like perhaps some other kind of being. Sure, they had to be compatible enough to sleep with human women. Okay, that's important to bring up. And that's partly why I would say that, okay, they're probably some other type of human. Now, to be clear, like I love, and I've said this many times, I mentioned Spaceships of Ezekiel earlier. Joseph Blumrich brings up a great point in the Spaceships of Ezekiel, where he says that, like, look, yeah, life can take any form that it needs to adapt and evolve and whatever, but it's likely that it actually, aliens would, if we're to use that term, would look like human beings because of what he calls the law of the lever, that like the way that humans are designed, the way our elbows and knees work, all this stuff, like that's actually like the most energy efficient way for evolution to produce, a sapient species. And it's a great point for him to bring up. And it's one I don't disagree with. I've joked many times that people used to complain in science fiction. It's like, oh, it's the forehead of the weak. They did it because they were cheap. And then I'm like, well, actually, it's a good bet the Klingons and the Vulcans and the Romulans and the Ferengi and the Cardassians and the Bajorans and everybody else, it's a good bet they would look like us most of the way. When you think about like concepts like the law of the lever. So anyway, and of course, even Joseph Blumrich would say that's not entirely exclusive, but just that it's likely. He wouldn't be the first person in the history of science to say such a thing. Konstantin Huygens, his son, Christian Huygens, would also say the same thing in his own books, that it's like, oh yeah, it's like they might not look like us, but they probably do, and so on. So, and that's without getting into like, boy, talk about secret societies. We could get into Jack Parsons around all of this, and what did he teach someone like Blumrich, or blah blah blah. Anyway, or that ilk in the space program, because Blumrich was the real deal in the space program. Anyway, okay. I'm getting all over the place. But, the idea that the Nephilim was some other type of, and it doesn't even have to be from another planet, but something other than human, but close to human. Yeah. Were they giant? Were they gigantes? Yes. It would appear that very much like if you put together these varying mythologies of that territory, and dabble in the necessary Greek mythology, I think you end up with, very much like this picture that, yes, they were gigantic, in comparison to other, to Homo sapiens. Were these, other beings, were these Nephilim, were they technologically advanced, perhaps more so than we are today? Yeah, likely. And again, remember that technological advancement does not require democratization of that technology. That may be unique to Homo sapiens because of our social nature. It just sort of happens. But keep that in mind, right? Because we do have, I think, plenty of evidence to show that there were very advanced technologies. There just wasn't a lot of it. But again, we confuse ourselves when we think that advanced technology has to be in the hands of the entirety of society like it is now. We think that all technology eventually becomes a smartphone. Like, no, that's just not true. Maybe only one person had the smartphone, in an ancient culture, albeit still incredibly advanced. Yes, an advanced humanoid species. By no means do they have to come from another planet. Could they be from a different modality, right? Could they be interdimensional of some kind? And perhaps in their dimension, they don't have women. And so they freak the fuck out and we're like, holy shit, my cock is hard, blah, blah, blah. I need to go take care of this. Could it be something along those lines? Perhaps. The idea of, of these other modalities, other dimensions of existence. This is something that requires, once again, a whole other conversation. One I'm willing to have, but it requires a whole other conversation to get into that. And I'm not entirely writing off the shall we say, the reptilian aspects of this, but not in the way I think that you think. So it more has to do with snake goddesses and a slew of other things in that, but that's a whole other affair. And because I think that there is potentially a reason that, even though we could say perhaps that some of these Roman roadshows, right, were showing off dinosaurs, there's a reason that they thought that those dinosaurs were an intelligent species and that they were perhaps the Anakim or the Gigantes or whatever. There's a reason that they assumed that. They didn't just make that up. Okay. But we have to talk about why would they think that. That's a separate conversation to have. Okay. So I think I answered your question. I'm over 2 hours now. I think I answered the question, at least of what, like the basics of what the Nephilim are. There's a lot more context, a lot more history that has to be covered around that. What is the purpose of this? I mean, to say nothing of the fact that, like, why did they find human women so beautiful? How are they able to mate with human women? Did they have a penis? Or did they use some kind of technology? If it is that they also had a penis, what does that mean about the penis as compared to not having access to a vagina, or at least to human females, right? It becomes a question of, like, what unique properties does the human female have that the Nephilim found so desirable? Was it just that they were hot? Or was it that they knew that mating with them had some kind of special power that their own species does not have? Those are questions to ask. Okay. And to get into more of the context around who the Nephilim were. But yep, Smithsonian covers stuff up. Oh boy, man, so many things I could say about that. I'm just looking at your question again. Were they giants? Again, my answer is yes. What were they? Gave you that. Humanoids do not have to be from another planet. They could be from Earth, just like everybody else. And in fact, looking at the history of it, it would seem that they were here, right? Because King Og was here before the flood. It is not a species that just landed on Mount Hermon and then walked out. You know what I mean? Like from a spaceship. Like, no, they were already here. That's abundantly clear, even in just what little I discussed here, is that whatever the Nephilim were, that they were already here for a long time. Okay. And then what else do we have? Yeah. And who were let's see, what are your thoughts on the Nephilim? Well, there you go. This gets into, man, like I said, there's so much to unpack from this serpent seed stuff. I mean, there's all kind of, oh, wow, I said that. Oh shit. Now people are like, what are you talking about? Like, anti-Semitic? No, stop. Shut up. How the hell? No, just stop. I'm just sprinkling things that deserve discussion. I'm not saying that they're real. Okay. But we'll leave it at that. Okay. I'm going to stop right there because there's just so much more. Get your questions in, folks. I don't care where. Spotify, YouTube, email address. If you know Instagram, if you want to message me, if you know a great way to message me, whatever, like however you want to get them to me, and I will get into them. But here is, I think, a great primer on, what these things were, and a lot of the possibilities around it, and bolstering perhaps what I was talking about last week about the Jews actually being from Crete, or the Hebrews, or take your pick. Okay. Actually being from Crete, maybe even being the Egyptians themselves, and the idea that, oh, actually maybe the Greek words existed before the Hebrew did. And so, basically the Septuagint may have existed before the Tanakh did. So, okay, that's enough blasphemy for 1 week. I will see all of you, on the other side. See you next week, folks.